Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good evening. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to this budget. And having seen a number of budgets throughout the years, I have to say what this budget represents is really, it's a plutocratic budget with more rats than a New York sewer. This budget squeezes out the middle class and small businesses. And I'm going to talk about some of the rats that are in this budget as we move along. It's not necessarily, I think, a nice term to categorize some of the items that are in here, but I think it is duly appropriate. To start out, early on in this session, there was a conversation about $100 million from a private investor coming into the state of Connecticut. And as part of that offer, the state of Connecticut was going to offer another matching $100 million. That proposal came early enough, certainly, for a public hearing. But a public hearing was never had. Some deal was
Excuse me, Representative Candelora. Even I'm having trouble hearing our colleagues, so thank you. Representative Candelora, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we had a proposal that was offered by a private business owner to donate $100 million to the state of Connecticut. And with that, we were seeking, there was an offer of the state of Connecticut matching $100 million. That offer was made in time for the state to put together a public hearing, presumably in the Finance Committee, and begin a dialogue on what that would look like. The goals were laudable. Let's provide money to underprivileged children for educational needs. And what happened? No public hearing. So we saw legislation being crafted in some back room, and surprise, it's in the budget. And what I find so offensive is that this corporation that's being formed completely divests the legislature of any authority. It's actually creating a corporate board made up of a bunch of rich people and politicians and exempts itself from state ethics, state contracting laws, and the freedom of information. And in fact, the legislation says that the governor, upon mutual agreement with the corporation, could decide whether or not it's going to supply any report at all to the General Assembly. So tonight, we're going to have a conversation and a vote of giving $20 million of state tax money to a corporation that is not transparent and answers to nobody. And guess what? If you want a report, you don't get it. You're going to have to go to the governor with hat in hand to try to get that information. And so these corporate board holders are going to go up to the balcony and sprinkle down dollars onto the, I guess, the peasants of Connecticut, and we're supposed to be happy about that. I don't understand why we think these individuals would be smarter than the legislature, who should be the body that's not only putting together what that document, what that corporation would look like, but at the very least, creating transparency that we are supposed to have in our budget process and in good government. I'm sad to say that transparency isn't there. You know, I sit here very frustrated, obviously, because then we look at the other portions of the budget and we are fleecing the middle class. We've gone from policies of 10 years ago, and I've said this before, where companies like Aetna, and good companies, Aetna, Pitney Bowes, Travelers, you name it, Sikorsky, would come to us and have global conversation because usually the tax policies were affecting companies at those levels. So right now they have a 10% corporate surcharge that was imposed upon them that's still being paid to this day and never phased out. And because of the bad spending habits, we were never able to do a better job of reforming our tax policies. So now we have a budget that is pickpocketing the rest of the state of Connecticut, pickpocketing our small business. We're going to be pickpocketing people when they drive up to park their vehicles. We're going to be pickpocketing people when they bring their laundry to the laundromat. And if you're in a certain field, like interior design, we're going to be pickpocketing that field as well. So I just ask, what does this budget represent? What are we standing for? And I do have a couple of questions that I don't think were flushed out in the last colloquy. So if I may, Madam Speaker, I guess ask a question probably of the chairman of the Finance Committee through you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In Section 78 of the budget bill, we are changing language dealing with bond premiums. And as I'm reading this, am I correct that there's always been a controversy of how bond premiums are to be used? In years past, they were sort of utilized in the general fund and used to offset spending. When we negotiated a bipartisan budget, we said that practice was not good financial practice, so let's make sure that that money is amortized over debt. So the premiums are being paid, paying down debt. As I read Section 78, am I correct that we are reverting back to giving flexibility to allow the bond premiums to be used toward anything through you?
Representative Rojas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is correct. It's delaying the law that was to go into effect July 1, through you.
Representative Candelora.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And then just getting to the fee increases that OPM is going to be looking at, there are a number of other fee increases that are in this budget. I imagine that OPM is going to take that into consideration when they're looking at different fees. But like, for instance, we're seeing an increase of the report filing, the annual report for a business, go from $20, I think it was, to $80. Does this language give the flexibility for OPM to visit fees that we're increasing already in this budget through you, Madam Speaker?
Representative Rojas.
Through you, Madam Speaker, ultimately any fee increases are going to be subject to a vote of the legislature. So certainly I hope OPM will take any changes that are being made now into consideration in making their recommendations, but ultimately it'll be up to us to make those final decisions. Through you.
Representative Candelora.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do appreciate that answer. And then the final section, which I'm not sure if it would be the finance chair could answer, but through you, we are allowing the Office of the Comptroller to offer individual health plans. And as I see it, I think this is offering health plans to municipalities and the state. Does this essentially allow the Comptroller to market these plans to any municipality throughout the state through you?
Representative Rojas.
Representative Candelora, Madam Speaker, if you could just have him repeat the question, please.
Representative, if you could repeat the question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In sections 377 to 383, the Comptroller is given the authority to offer different health plans, I guess, to participants. Does this language give the ability essentially for the Comptroller to offer health plans to various municipalities throughout the state of Connecticut, regardless of whether whether the municipality is part of the state plan through you?
Representative Rojas.
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes.
Representative Candelora.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And then I think my final question is probably for the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee. We do have a number of earmarks that are outlined in the budget, and I think traditionally they've been there. I've seen them in previous budgets. Is there a criteria that's set forth for designating those earmarks other than legislative requests through you?
Representative Walker.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I thank the good gentleman for the question. Yes, the criteria is that they are for youth after-school programming or programming that works with youth throughout the state of Connecticut. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Candelora.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I guess I noticed that theme. I appreciate that theme. Having somebody that's a very strong supporter of Boy Scouts and strong supporter of Little Leagues. I know we have Scouts here today. But one of the line items in here is providing $37,000 to a particular troop. And having been a troop leader for over a decade now, it just seems like a lot of money for a particular troop to need for operations. Is this money for capital, or are these just for activities? They could be carried over a number of years, or are they expended all in one year through you?
Representative Walker?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The money, the 37, would be for 1 year. They have to expend it in the 1 year. It would be for activities. It could be one troop that has multiple locations in the towns. Most of these towns have many more people in their troop groups and things like that. And the other part is there is no real underlying dollars in many of our troops. So what we're doing is trying to supplement those dollars, because if you know, for the last few years, we have really eroded after-school activities. And I'm sure that many of my colleagues here have seen some uptick in some of the youth activities in the communities, and I won't get into the neighborhoods, but many of those communities have absolutely no after-school programming. So that's what these dollars are for. And more than likely, that I bet you that the troop group that you're looking at probably covers like a whole area, a major area. So through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Candelora?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate that. I certainly understand that, especially when it comes to Boy Scouts, we have various troops. They all do fundraising. I'm sure everybody goes to the grocery store and sees them selling their items. In particular, our district has for the first time, we started back up, actually, New Haven troops, which have become much more active, which is important. And so I certainly don't want to minimize what that organization does, because I am a big supporter. But my final question, that line item, it points to a Troop 105, Boy Scout Troop 105, as being designated toward receiving the funds. And it does not specify what council or what district. And there's multiple Troop 105s. There's probably a couple within the state of Connecticut, but there's many throughout the country with that designation. If there is some ambiguity over which troop should actually receive that money, would OPM have the ability to make the determination of what the intent of who that troop is that is the recipient of that through you?
Representative Walker? Through you, Madam Speaker. I understand. What we did was we abbreviated the names and the information on many of them because of the fact that what we wanted to do was make sure that we identified the amount and to the specific name of it, but the 5013C, who is the administrator in the organization, all the details of the organization, and they're kept with the Judicial Department for these line items. Through you, Madam Speaker.
Representative Candelora?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I don't have any further questions. I do have some other remarks as a result of the answers to my questions. When it comes to these earmarks, and I understand certainly that these items are important to somebody, but there are other things that are important to people as well when we do things in this budget, and I feel sometimes that we've taken those items for granted. Since the last minimum wage increase occurred, I'm in the recreation field, and I've had 2 organizations call me to tell me that they're closing their businesses. They asked me if I wanted to take them over. My business supports all of these organizations. Little League comes to use my facility for free. I don't charge them at all. And I sit here and I think I am not going to be in a position to give all these organizations the donations for the raffle prizes, setting up for the cookie sales, letting them come in and have tryouts for their baseball organizations. And that makes me pretty bitter when I sit here. And then I see on the other end, the state of Connecticut is picking and choosing what organizations are going to be receiving money. We have Little Leagues in here that are going to be getting $60,000 for one Little League. I've served on our Little League board. Our Little League board does not have that kind of an operating budget. There's not a need for it. $37,000 for one Boy Scout troop is phenomenal to me. Unless they're going away to a national jamboree, troops don't raise that kind of money. I've sat on Boy Scout troops that have had 30 kids in the organization, and we had an annual operating budget of $4,000. So for me to now think that I'm going to have to, as a business, start charging these organizations because of what we're doing in the budget, and then turn around and the state of Connecticut is going to know better and is going to take that money and allocate it out, to me, I have a problem with it. You know, I look at the bond premiums. This governor stood up and talked about, we're going to go on a debt diet. I mean, I heard that soundbite for the last 3 months, similar to the soundbite of, you know, trucks-only tolls, and we're going to give you a property tax credit across the board. Well, this debt diet is going to be wiped out by the fact that we are now going to go back to this bad policy of using bond premiums for our general obligations in the budget. You know, it was something that I think the Republicans, we set our hair on fire every time we looked at it. And sometimes those numbers were in the hundreds of millions of dollars. We're not talking 5 million or 10 million. We had a year, I think it was over $300 million were diverted out of money that should be going to paying down debt. That's why we put this proposal in the bipartisan budget. And we're going to just wipe it out now today. And so I have no interest in listening to these sound bites of debt diet when we were going to undo that good practice. You know, I'm concerned about what we're doing in the comptroller's office. I think many people in this building might realize that we had added municipalities, and I think it was party line vote. So I want to say the Democrat Party decided to add municipalities to bid into the state's health care plan because we thought it would be a way to save money, bring more people into the pool. And I was surprised, I think it was last year, that my town joined the plan. And I'm thinking to myself, how the heck are they joining a state plan that traditionally has always been far more expensive than what the town of North Branford provides? And then lo and behold, I find out, well, we've been subsidizing this municipal plan that the towns are joining into, and it's been running in the red, I think this year, $10 million, I heard. So rather than say, we've got to stop this practice, which was a big mistake, we're now going to give the comptroller the authority to compete with our private healthcare sector. So now the comptroller is going to start marketing more healthcare plans to municipalities. And rather than fix the fact that he is subsidizing a healthcare plan with our tax dollars, we ignore that fact. Let's give him more authority to bring in more towns, and maybe if we bring in more towns, we could somehow smooth out and bring us into the black. That's crazy, without any reform. You know, I feel like this proposal is like the MARB language we put in 2 years ago, where we saw that municipalities, if they're getting in trouble, we need to sort of get in here and help them restructure. And we all supported on a bipartisan basis. And what happened? We gave Hartford $500 million and bailed them out. And now we're paying for it. You know, the fee increases, I'm glad to see that OPM, you know, has the ability or has the requirement to come back to us before we increase them. Because we could sit here and say this is a great thing that we're eliminating the business entity tax. But what are we doing? We're turning around and increasing the annual filing report for businesses, which, you know, by the way, our Little Leagues and our Boy Scouts and every other organization who has an LLC and a corporation have to file those same reports. And as a business owner, for me, they're nuisance reports. You forget to file them. You get the email now. If it goes into your spam, you don't even see it. And then all of a sudden, I've had an LLC, I had to file 3 years' worth to catch up because you just don't pay attention to it. So now you're going to have businesses having to catch up by paying a $360 bill rather than a $60 bill. It's a nuisance. And I come back to the fact that those are the things where we're pickpocketing the state of Connecticut. You know, when I look at this budget, I'm reminded of sort of looking at, going to the supermarket, and I get that flyer in the mail, and there's a whole bunch of great sale items that attracts me to the store. And I get into that store at my shopping cart, and I start buying all those sale items, and my wife gives me the grocery list, so I have to buy everything else along with it. And as I'm putting everything in the cart, I'm realizing all the other things I'm buying is 3 times the amount of its normal price. And by the time I get done filling up my shopping cart, I'm realizing I've been had. I'm spending more money than I otherwise would have if I just went to the regular store and purchased my items. And I feel like that's what the state of Connecticut has done over the last 10 years. And I don't know how much longer we could keep putting out these sale flyers, showing our discounts on one hand, and then when you get into the store, you got all those jacked up prices on the other. So obviously, I'm not going to be supporting this budget. I look forward to the continued debate. I hope there's appropriate consideration to the Republican amendments that are being proposed, because God knows the state of Connecticut needs it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.